Did Daniel Dubois quit, or did he just take a sensible decision to save the rest of his career? This is After the Bell, Mirror Fighting's boxing show in association with Betfair.
Hey, it's the WBA heavyweight champion of the world.
Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee.
The Mirror brings you After the Bell in association with Betfair.
Hello and welcome to this week's show with me, Martin Domin, with George Groves and with Declan Taylor. If you're watching the show, please do give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. If you are listening, please do rate and review. Plenty to get through once again. We will start, of course, with Joe Joyce's victory over Daniel Dubois. Look at what Joe did well, what Daniel didn't do so well. Look at what's next for both men. I will touch very briefly on the other heavyweight fights. On Saturday night, as Mike Tyson made his return against Roy Jones Jr. Then we'll look ahead to next week, Friday night. Martin Murray challenges for a world title for the fifth time against Billy Joe Saunders. On Saturday, Lyndon Arthur challenges Anthony Yarde challenges Lyndon Arthur for the British light heavyweight title. And Errol Spence makes his long-awaited return following his car crash incident against Danny Garcia. But first, on Saturday night, Joe Joyce upset the odds and really derailed Daniel Dubois' seemingly perfect path to a world title. A 10th round stoppage in their heavyweight clash. Daniel Dubois' eye, well, it was shut by the time he took a knee and the fight was waved off. George, we'll come to Daniel Dubois in a bit in terms of what happened to him and what happens next. But with Joe Joyce, his performance, it felt very educated, very disciplined. I would say, how did you rate it?
Yeah, that's a good way to analyze it off the bat. It had a lot more discipline than usual for Joyce, which is obviously to be expected. It's a bigger fight, a tougher fight against a guy we know can punch hard. So, he wasn't so gung-ho. Did not walk into shots, giving away so many silly shots. And worked his jab real well. He's got this sort of herky-jerky style. He's upright a lot of the time. He almost gallops in and out of range. And the jab, it's not like say the Dubois jab, which comes and it's hidden behind the shoulder. It's got a bit more of a natural mechanics to it. Joyce is almost like it's an arm shot, but the size of him and the way that he moves in and out of range and the amount of times he will throw it, it's a good weapon, and it was a good weapon for him throughout the entire fight. I felt like it was. There was periods where each fighter was maybe catching his breath or taking parts of the round off. And this was the point when if you're going to be that fighter who's going to have that, not even higher work rate in general, but that higher work rate with the jab, it can really offset, the rest of the fight in that you end up controlling and dictating the pace, or at least that's what it feels and seems like. As a judge or as a fan, as a boxing fan watching. So real good performance from Joyce. He showed he weathered a storm a couple of times where he did get caught with a few shots. No real shots came in that either guy you thought, oh, this guy is in real trouble here. But it was a great performance where I'd imagine for someone like Joyce, where at his age, 35, people are saying, you lose this fight, where'd you go from here? He must be, over the moon with the win. Real big win, best win on his record so far. And he's calling out Alexander Usyk. So he's got his head, he's got his head in a direction of where he wants his career to be going.
Declan, it felt like, well, if you look at the odds, from when the fight was made in February, the odds definitely sort of widened from being relatively 50-50 to Dubois being comfortably odds on. Very few people really picked Joe Joyce. Were you surprised by how the fight unfolded?
I mean, in a way, I was surprised at how little trouble really Dubois gave Joyce. That, like George said, there weren't any moments where he's rocked him and he's hurt him there. He did land a few, couple of nice hooks to the body, a few right hands, and because of the way that Joyce looks, sometimes it looks like he's in trouble, but he never really is. Totally unflappable. So, I mean, in a sense, I was surprised. That was my only surprising thing. I did think, like I said last week, it was going to go a lot later than people thought. I didn't see that ending come in, obviously, but not massively surprised by the way it went. What I was surprised about a bit was Dubois' seeming inability to defend against the jab, which was obviously Joyce just threw. I haven't seen the stats, don't really like the stats, but he threw a lot of jabs and most of them landed. No wonder his eye ended up looking like that. And all I can put it down to, and it was something that Joyce had said to me last week when I interviewed him, is that he was, when they sparred in GB a long time ago, and this is just a spar in a room in Sheffield, Joyce said that Dubois' nerves were palpable. Every spar, he was totally nervous, so scared, which is not a bad thing. Mike Tyson said he was scared before every fight. There is a bit of that. But Joyce wondered whether that might constrict Dubois a bit because he's never really been there. Joyce has dealt with Olympic finals, big fights and, headlines and all that sort of stuff. And Dubois had never really been there in that sense. And that was all I could put it down to, is that maybe he was so nervous. He was doing really, really novice-y things, like just overreaching with the jab a lot, where usually it looks really crisp or really looking slow at times. And you see it a lot with amateur shows and stuff. You see like no bouters, for instance, who look great in sparring, great in the gym. They look like they're ready, and then they get out there and it's like they've never thrown a punch before. It wasn't quite that bad, but there was something about Dubois that was just a little bit off. And that inability to spot that jab, it's not a particularly fast one from Joyce. It's effective, but it's not like it's whipping out there like one of George's, for instance. But he just couldn't defend against it. And if you can't defend against a jab in a fight against a dude that is that big, you're in serious trouble. And that's basically how it happened. That injury was just a repetitive, it's not a repetitive strain injury, but you know what I mean? It's a repetitive same shot on the same spot of your face. It's gonna give in at some point. And that was all that really surprised me, was that lack of defense. And you wonder, my thinking is the likes of Ebenezer Teti, Richard Lartey, Kayotaro Fujimoto, these guys, they don't prepare you for anything. It's a showcase. Dubois had showcase after showcase. He's been knocking people over. He's never had to defend against a serious jab at any point in his professional career. And I think that's what was his downfall, and that's why he came unstuck.
I do, just a little side point. I would love to know if Joe Joyce has ever been, if anything's ever troubled him in life in general. I'm sure he just, is unfathomable. This
is a guy who's done, a fine art degree. He went to America and became a cheerleader. He plays the trumpet even now. He goes on his roof and plays virtual reality. He's totally wired differently to most people. And when you're like that, nothing troubles you. And me and you, Martin, can't really talk like that. But I always find that boxers are a bit like that. And he is at the extreme level. And I think Dubois is the other end. He harnesses his nerves and becomes dangerous. Joe Joyce doesn't have any, and he's dangerous.
Funny you should say that, because I would say Joe Joyce looks nervous as well. Like, just might not portray it in the usual conventional way, And sure, he's been part of, big fights, big occasions. But obviously, so has loads of fighters that then confess to being racked with nerves beforehand. Usually, it's just how you deal with that and how you make it a positive or a negative, on the performance on fight night. And so like Joyce, he's known for having a good engine. I'm pretty sure that's due mainly down to the fact of the way he trains and probably just through his style of fighting. He's had to accumulate that sort of engine to win fights, so he has to just win with volume. And therefore, getting nervous might take a little bit out of the engine, but not enough to, have too much of a negative effect on a fight. Whereas Dubois, slightly different. I mean, after the first round, where there wasn't an awful lot in the first round, not an awful lot happened, but it looked like Joyce was starting to establish the range better with the jab and had the better first round. I didn't hear the instructions in Dubois' corner, but you'd imagine it was right. Come on now, right? Put something on him, liven up, wake up, let's get going. And then he come out and he had a real busy, heavy, threw loads of big shots. But it was almost like naive because it's like, why have you had such a change in pace? Like from first round to second round, unless this is what it's going to be now from here on in, you're wasting energy because you finish this round. If you've emptied the tank, you need a round or two to catch that back. You've still got 10 rounds to go. This isn't like a period of the fight where the tables are actually really going to turn, indefinitely, where you're in round 8, 9, 10, and it's like, right, now give them a big round, put a big round in, swing the fight back in your favour, and then we'll see it out to the finish. Without being too harsh, from a technical point of view, both of them are really naive. Even Joyce in their their shot selection at times. There's times where they'll get hit with a big shot, or just hit with a shot, knocks them off balance, and then they're trying to trade back with an uppercut, which is not the sort of shot you want to be throwing when you're out of range, off balance, and you're that big and, without being too cruel, that slow. Both the guys don't have electric hand speed. They're not fantastically fast, from guard position to, finishing the punch. Neither of them set the shots up that much with head movement or, a feint or anything like that. Again, because they're so big that they're just not quick enough. It's almost like a waste of energy. But for me, that was really bizarre why Dubois... And I've put it down to inexperience, maybe. Just inexperience, that he needs a bit more time in the gym to know, definitely up the work rate this round 2, but not to this extent because you ain't going to sustain it. And he didn't. Maybe it was just, as you say earlier, Dec, where, he's had highlight reel fights where he's blown people away. And... he just, you've got that thought process of in a fight, right, just get a couple of big shots in, I'm going to hurt him, and then this fight will be over. But this will be a tough learning curve for him, a steep learning curve. You hope that, as a boxing fan, that he would have learned a lot from this fight, and all fighters should when they start stepping up through the levels and facing tougher opposition. But I just thought that was a really interesting part, an insight into maybe what I thought of the performance.
But you mentioned the level of opposition. Now, we said last week when they had their face-off and it was put to Dubois that he hadn't had a middle fight, and as you said, Dec, his response was very quick. You are my middle fight, which obviously turned out not to be right. Do we not question the matchmaking that got him to that point, especially when you compare it to Joe Joyce, who'd had fewer fights, but who had, Stavern and Jennings weren't peak, but undoubtedly, just a quick glance at the record, you can tell that he has to have learned more on his way up.
Joe Joyce was fighting Ian Lewison in his debut, very good, established domestic level heavyweight. But this is a guy who had been to the Olympics, he boxed in WSB, he boxed Alexander Usyk, he'd done it, he's seasoned, and he was 32 or whatever when he turned over. Dubois, and this was a very interesting point that Fraser Clark made on Instagram Live or something, I heard it this morning, that he said last night was a big win for the programme. And that's exactly what it was. It was proof that if you're on GB and you're going to these tournaments and you're sparring and you're preparing and you're learning like Joe Joyce did, you're going to come out of it a well-rounded fighter like that. Whereas Daniel Dubois, who got poached because I guess his promoter didn't want to lose out like he did with Anthony Joshua. They wanted the next Joshua, and what it means is you've got to learn on the job. So that means really good sparring, which he's had. The likes of Lawrence Okoli, a lot of rounds with him, and all sorts of heavyweights down at the Peacock. They've done a lot of learning, but then you have to do the learning under the lights. As much as I hate that expression, means you can't go in there and fight. Really, you can't fight world beaters. So what's happened is that he's had to knock people over. His big step up was Nathan Gorman. Nathan Gorman had an awful preparation. It was still a great win. Awful preparation, wasn't the best Nathan Gorman, and he knocked him out. There comes a point when you have to then go into this fight. And like he said, he thought it was the middle fight, but Joe Joyce was right all along. It was just he hadn't had that test yet. So I don't know whether questioning the matchmaking is the right thing to do, because it's not as if anyone thought this is too early for. None of us did. I mean, we all picked Dubois to win. So, and a lot of people were the same. So it wasn't even as if I said too early for him. He should have a couple more fights. The only people who said that was Joe Joyce. So I don't know about if it was a matchmaking problem, but what is clear is that he ain't got the seasoning. And last night he would have got a lot of seasoning.
I agree. Sorry, man. I agree. I think the matchmaking was good. I mean, I had Dubois up on the cards, and it was Frampton and lots of the whole BT punditry team were like scratching their head and accusing him of quitting, which obviously we don't know at this period right in time. He's an unbeaten prospect who was ahead on the cards, and he's got a significant eye injury that we can see, and he's decided to take a knee and not get up. I was really disappointed that he was sort of thrown under the bus at that point when, we don't know what sort of eye injury he's got at this point. We don't know what sort of pain he's in. We don't know. And you can trust someone like Daniel Dubois to not be able to articulate himself properly at the right time, and that's not his fault because, that's something that we know. So disappointed with that, but I think it was good match. It was a great fight, fight that we wanted to see, that the fans wanted to see. And, you want to make a prediction, and, the vast majority of people out there did pick Dubois, but, Deck alluded to it last week, 3-1, I think, was just for Joyce to win. And people were messaging me going, it's just too good. Like, is this worth, have they got it wrong here? And you're like, well, doesn't matter what the odds are if he doesn't win, but the fight is closer than that. So good matchmaking. And I think, maybe even a great decision. I haven't seen any reports this morning, but if Dubois has got a serious injury to his eye that, could be a career-ending injury if he fought on for another couple of rounds, then great. What a brilliant, and courageous decision he's made at that point as an unbeaten pro in a huge, huge, huge fight for him to say, this is just not right. I watched Kell Brook get an orbital eye injury, and I've watched, I can't think of other fighters now or any other significant injury. He might be aware of it. He might be feeling it. I mean, and if it comes out that he's got an eye injury, then I think he deserves some praise now for having the courage to pull himself out at that stage to fight another day.
I'm not saying that he shouldn't have fought Joe Joyce. What I'm saying is we said last week that if you picked Daniel Dubois, you were basically saying that he had more than he'd shown so far. Mm-hmm. And if you were picking Joe Joyce, you felt like he hadn't, I guess. So all I'm saying is he hadn't been given that opportunity to be tested until the point he fought Joe Joyce.
Yeah.
And I know that's easy to say now.
No, that's totally true. And that also was the problem with becoming a star so early and being such a leading light of that stable from the start. It meant that he couldn't do 8-rounders on undercards. Every time he's boxed, I haven't got his record up, but I think just about every time he's boxed, or at least 90% of it, he's been the headliner. So he can't go and do his learning. And it means that there's people look at him and he's under the spotlight from the start. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a bit like when we talked about Conor Ben's the same. But what it did mean is that he came unstuck. And I'm not even, if you really survey the heavyweight landscape, it's not even like you could say he should have boxed him at that point. Actually, it shouldn't have been Ebenezer Teti. He should have boxed this guy, because it was just, he was knocking over the heavyweights that everyone knocks over. Kevin Johnson, he boxed him, went the distance, I think, in Leicester in a horrible fight. So he's done all those hard yards that all the other heavyweights have. In the end, he just came unstuck against a massive, big bloke, jabbing, sticking to a game plan, which, by the way, I'm sure you're going to get onto this. His head coach wasn't even there. His head coach wasn't even there for camp. It's mad. And he still won that fight with a game plan and the tactics bang on. So, yeah, I do think that he lacked some seasoning. But to be honest, I wonder whether that at the root of it was the fact that he turned over so young. and with 7 amateur fights. And in the end, it just caught up with him.
That's what back to Fraser Clark, who win for the program. That's going to be a real task for a promoter or manager when you've got a big heavyweight turning over at like 18, 19 years of age, when they can't afford to lose. They need to be in testing fights. Whereas if they'd, if you'd done a year or 2, or even 3 as an amateur, gone around the world, boxed all these Eastern Europeans, Americans, Cubans, and get beaten, going a world boxing series, the WBS, and might lose a couple, but it's not the end of the world. You've gained so much experience.
And you're fighting elite amateur. You're fighting the guys that are as good as you. You're fighting the Russian. You're fighting the Cuban. That's the thing, isn't it? That's when you're an amateur. That's what happens. Just like you did when you were boxing for England.
Sometimes your face don't fit. Sometimes you don't get picked. You don't get selected. You don't go to the right tournaments, and you might. So it's a tough one. It's a tough one. You got to I would have advised Dubois to have not turned over so early, just for that reason, because you're going to run out of heavyweights real quick. If you fly through these heavyweights in 2 years and you haven't really gained enough experience, but now you're going to have to make a jump up, or you're then treading water. But at the same time, I'm trying to think of some amateur fighters that have gone on, done successful as pros, but don't really have a lot to their name as an amateur. I think the only I can think of right now is Callum Smith, because there was middleweights in front of him around the time that they were preparing for the 2012 Olympics. His brother's pro, his other brother's pro. He's probably training the pro gym already, and it's like, I'm going to go over. Took a little bit of time to develop, but he's in the pro gym, working hard, getting pro sparring.
Anthony Yarde's another one. We'll speak about him later, but I think he had 13 amateur fights, and he's another one that just went, actually, I think I'm suited to the pro game. And I think, to be honest, I think it shows in the way he boxes.
Yeah, but, so there's two sides of the coin. One, you can get left in the system. I wouldn't want to be Joyce either, turn pro at 32. Yeah, you got that Olympic medal, but now you're against the clock now to make something as a pro. People are, 3 years in, he's on the cusp of now fighting the top guys in the division. But even then, you're like, well, you're still behind. You still need to get a move on, and that's not the sort of position you want to be in as a fighter. So it's fascinating. I think there's no one rule fits everyone. It's each to their own. But it's funny because they're both at the opposite ends of that spectrum, Dubois and Joyce.
Let's also, one thing we're forgetting is that Daniel Dubois, without looking at their bank accounts, I can only imagine, is far richer than Joe Joyce is, and he's 12 years younger. So he turned over. He was a medal prospect for 2024. So he would have been on GB money, which is fine. But the sort of money he's made so far as a pro would vindicate, in some people's eyes, the idea to turn over being headliner. He would have made a fortune yesterday if it wasn't for the pandemic, but he still got paid for that. But he's a rich man already. He's made a lot of money, which he wouldn't have done if he was still amateur. Look, he would have been behind Fraser Clark maybe at this point on GB still, if they were earmarking him for 2024. So he made the decision. He got paid well for it, but in the end, it just there's no hiding place. No one cares about your bank balance when you're in there and when Joe Joyce is pounding away at your face. But at the same time, I think that's the toss-up, isn't it? It's like, that's why he would have been persuaded, him and his dad would have been persuaded to turn him over that early. It's like, you can make this much money, or you can stay on GB, pick up a wage, but what about if you break your hand and you miss the Olympics, or you miss the Worlds or whatever, and you're not the number one super heavyweight, which he wasn't. There was a toss-up, but I think what's happened is it's meant that in a fight like that, he just wasn't ready.
You mentioned this sort of accusation, if you like, that he quit. It's a very loaded word, isn't it? Especially in boxing, because if you hear that someone's quit, you're basically saying that they just gave up, and threw the towel in themselves, rather than, as you say, there's more to it, taking that decision, probably for the best of his health and maybe his career. But he is so young. How is this sort of, even if he in himself is confident that he took the right decision, how is he going to wake up and deal with the aftermath of this all being thrown at him when he's basically had such a seamless time so far.
Well, I'd imagine. I mean, Frank Warren straight away at the time, straight in the interview, defended Dubois' decision and said, "Look, we don't know how bad the eye injury is, and it's evident that his eye was swollen shut, and he was getting hit with it, and it, with 3 rounds to go." Close fight, but 2 judges had him up. I had him up. He's made a decision to pull himself out. I suppose it only in terms of how he deal with it after, it might come down to 2 things. One, what is he actually really thinking and feeling, and then how's he gonna move on from there, and then obviously the public. What's said in the public, and that's not really his responsibility. I'm sure, as I say, like Frank Warren's already on top of that, and there'll be people out there to correct, what was put out last night, to protect him for the future, whether it's true or not. It's an opinion sport. You're entitled to your opinion, but no doubt there'll be like some sort of X-ray scan that comes out next week. We floating something or other, and then everyone will be, oh, poor. That's why he did it. Poor Daniel. That's why. And we'll move on to the next thing. But only time will tell, I think, with when we find out the extent of the injury, and whether he decided that I'm uncomfortable here. Or whether he's got a serious injury, and it's because there's question marks above Dubois in that he's blown everyone away. He hasn't had to dig deep. Now he's digging deep. Has he quit? I think it's a bit harsh to judge him because there's no evidence before, but that's what people do. There's some fighters out there who have proved before in the past that they've gone through pain barriers, they fought on with injuries, and then if that had happened to them last night, then they might have had a little bit more grace, a little bit more leniency, but at the same time, that's not guaranteed. So one person I can always think of is Kell Brook gets one eye busted in one fight, comes back next fight, an eye goes on the other side, and he's still getting stick for being a quitter. It's like, mate, I know what this feels like. I've done it before. But that's boxing. It's cruel. What are you gonna do?
I do think we generally need to have a bit of a conversation about the idea of quit in boxing, because the same people who hammer him, and it's not just fat. I mean, it's bad enough fat non-boxers doing it, but when boxers do it, okay, you get it. But it's not good because it's the same people who would be, if he had lost his eyesight yesterday, say he carried on and he hadn't taken the knee, or he got up in time for the count and he'd done another round and he'd woken up this morning blind and he could never box again, it would have been called a tragedy. And everyone would have been like, oh my God, poor dad, what a shame. For a start, no one would have paid his bills from now on. That would have been him on the scrap heap. We would have moved on. But he's 23 years old. He can still box. He's still got his eyesight. There's nothing brave about losing your eyesight or getting physically maimed in a boxing match. It's a blood sport, but it's still a sport. And the idea that as soon as something like that happens last night, you're labelled a quitter, and I see it straight away. Once you quit, once you'll do it every time, and things like that. It's not good. I don't like it. It's not good for the sport. I think people should know better by now. We know what can happen to people in the ring. So as soon as that, and it's not like look at what he put into that fight. Look at the state of his face. Look at the state of his eye, and then you see the slow-mos of the jab that stopped it directly onto that eye. Like, can you imagine what that's actually doing for someone physiologically? Never mind if he's 6'6" and that heavy, he's still got the same eyes and the same brain as everyone else. Like, to then label him a quitter and say that he quit and he swallowed it and this and that, I just always find it uncomfortable. I think it's a shame. What isn't a shame, hopefully, is that he lives to fight another day. He's still got however many. The other option is like, you go out on your shield and you hear it, I'd rather die than lose. And it's like, what? Like, what are we promoting here? And if you're not like that, you're somehow lesser than the people who do say it. It's not good. I don't think it's a good look for the sport. What do people want? Like, what do people want out from Dubois then? To make it to the end of the fight? Okay, yeah, he maybe would have won on points. Joe Joyce beat him. Okay, he wasn't unconscious on the floor. He beat him in a way that the fight had to end. The quitting thing is not good. I think it's a bit of a stain on the sport. And the problem is when someone doesn't quit and gets seriously hurt, the one that's jumping to mind right now is the Nick Blackwell fight against Chris Eubank, for instance. But that's one of hundreds. This conversation comes up. What, do we denigrate people for quitting too much and stuff? But then when something like this happens, all of that's forgotten. And I think sometimes we just need a bit of perspective. We need a bit of perspective what these guys put into on the night and what now is going to follow. Everyone else goes about their day, goes about the rest of their weekend, their week. Daniel Dubois has got to live with this, got to live with what had happened to him physically and emotionally, because he's a young guy. And we want to see him back. We don't want his career to end because he doesn't want to be a quitter. I think it's ridiculous, the whole thing. One thing that, in terms of going forward, really fascinates me is this sort of triumvirate with Dubois, Joyce and Frank Warren. As far as I'm aware, Joyce and Dubois are both with Frank Warren, but it's clearly obvious whenever you hear them talk or you see them that Dubois, understandably, is the golden goose, being so young and having, he could have had a decade of fights ahead of him, and maybe still will. But even at the end of it, I just felt like, I'm not sorry for Joe Joyce and his sympathy, but he just felt a little bit like he was an unwanted guest at the party. I don't know the ins and outs of the contract situation, but I guess it must be hard. Listen, if you're the promotion, you've got both guys, and one of your guys has got one eye gone. But I don't know. It just seems a strange relationship to me. I don't know what you think, Nick or George.
Yeah, I've been Joe Joyce before, where you're allegedly with the promoter, but you're not. But I'm not sure. Obviously, no one knows what the entirely deals are. But I'd imagine Dubois is signed into Warren long term, and Joyce isn't. Joyce is on a fight by fight basis, or maybe a 3 or 5 fight deal or something like that. He signed with Haymaker before in the past. He's been with Richard Schaefer as a promoter, maybe an advisor. I think he's still with Schaefer to a certain degree. So, and now we're talking about fighting Usyk, who signed to DAZN. So, he's very much a matchroom fighter. So, Frank might need to make him a great offer to, keep him or get another rematch with Dubois, but maybe he doesn't want to do that. And maybe Joyce moves on now and he's not actually with Frank Warren anymore. But, great for him. I think he should definitely enjoy his moment. He was in a lovely big arena for him, full of fans to absorb that win with some atmosphere. So that was a shame for him, but he must be over the moon this morning to have won this big fight, and looking forward to what his future holds.
I don't know whether it's automatic that he takes Daniel Dubois' position in the WBO. Dubois was ranked number 2 behind Usyk, and of course it's not yet definitely for sure that Anthony Joshua will vacate that heavyweight's belt. But let's say he does, and Joyce is indeed in a position to take on Usyk, and that fight can be made for some point next year. Is there any question about him going straight into that fight?
No. What, you mean Joe Joyce? Is there any question about Joe Joyce? No, because like George mentioned earlier, he's always been up against it time-wise. He needed to get the quickest route to a world title. In the end, it turned out to be a hard one. He'll take it. He's boxed Usyk already. He lost, but it was a competitive fight. I remember that night. It was a mad night at York Hall. And he'll fancy his chances massively because we know, obviously, Usyk, the whole point is that he's not that big, and Joe Joyce is very big and he's very durable. And has Usyk got the pop to keep him off? It's a great fight. Already it's a great fight, and it's such a lovely match of styles, like that herky-jerky, not particularly pretty, but super effective style against Usyk, who's got every trick in the book, all the angles, the feet, the distance. It's a great fight. I think they'll go straight into it. It's an interesting point that I hadn't considered, though, that George mentioned there, that Usyk's with DAZN. So, it'd be a vacant belt. So if they did a purse bid, it would be 50-50. But I don't know. I don't know if Joyce has actually gets the shot automatically with the BO as well. Who knows? Because what they come up with. But yeah, in answer to your question, he ain't hanging around for that. And I hope we see it straight away because I think Joyce deserves it. And I'm not saying I'll pick him to win, but what a great heavyweight fight, which is outside of Joshua, Fury, and Wilder.
Yeah, hopefully. The one thing that I do wonder, Joyce's manager has done a few deals with Matchroom recently, a few of his fighters. I'm not, obviously all fighters are different, but I just wonder if there is any sort of escape clause, if you like, for Joyce from Warren, if there might be some news on that front in the weeks to come. In terms of Dubois, we talked about how it would have been difficult to find opponents, if you like, between who he had fought and Joyce. Is that now the same problem, that it's going to be hard to sort of find opponents that will give him the sort of middle fight, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, you only got you won't get that many attempts at a middle fight before you get forgotten about. Maybe only even one, So now the rebuild is even more important. And what do you want to do? You don't want to put him back in to a tougher challenge than he's had before, barring Joyce. At the same time, if this guy's with good records who are just tomatoes who he's going to blow away, then what's he learned from that? And are you luring him back into a false sense of security? The real going to be very tough, especially in the heavyweight division when, there's guys out there that might look good on paper, but they've already lost the fight because they're worried about getting knocked out by someone like Dubois, who looks like he can hit that hard. My advice would be one knockover job just to get the confidence back, because he is still relatively young and does feel very inexperienced. And then a testing fight, but take him away. It's not going to be a pressure fight where you're headlining a big show. You want someone else to be the headline, and you're just like a chief support or something or other. But in a testing fight. But in the meantime, as well, take him out, get him some sparring, take him around the world. Get him in America, get him to Vegas, get him to New York, and just let him do round after round after round, and get a feel of it. That's it. When you get to that level, this level where you're about to make that last jump, it's very tough, because before you might be sparring guys who on paper are ahead of you, like they're more experienced than you, they might be world champions or fighting for world titles, and it's okay because you're in there and you're the prospect. And then the second that you're going through that transition of becoming one of their opponents, they don't want to spar you no more. You're in that middle ground where you might have some young guys coming through to keep you sharp, but you're not actually really learning anything from them in terms of being a wily old pro. So you kind of got to figure it out yourself. But at the same time, go out there and get the sparring. So he's just got to put himself amongst it. That'll be a great asset for him if he can manage that and get out of the UK, get to the States, or even who knows if they've got connections now across Eastern Europe with MTK, Frank Warren, and stuff like that. Then through some sort of link like that, get some sparring in.
I mean, he could be out for quite some. Well, I imagine he will now be out for quite some time anyway, until that eye does heal. That is for another day. Those future fights. Now, Declan and George have both tried to ignore the fact there was another heavyweight fight on Saturday night, and Mike Tyson did return to the ring against Roy Jones Jr. We're not going to dissect or break down or even really talk about it, but I did just want to mention it so that we're not accused of ignoring it. It was essentially two 50-year-old men having a fight.
I told you it'd be a draw.
Yeah, that's that. That was the thing. You're nailing it at the moment. The predictions, I thought I was very much a one-trick pony now with my my underdog prediction. But since then, I've come unstuck, and the draw. I mean, you've never missed a draw yet.
No,
it's amazing.
Draw king.
And yeah,
I hear
right
though.
on the cards.
said that Tyson basically won every round, though. I haven't seen it, but I've read a couple of reports from America, and apparently he won every round, and it was a draw. It was just obviously going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, Tyson definitely should have won, and it was almost as if they'd given the scorecards out before, because one was I can't remember the exact numbers, but one was obviously a draw. One was, I think, 3 rounds to Jones, and the other 3 or 4 to Tyson. So it was almost as if they basically said, right, just take a card. Each of you take a card. It doesn't matter what happens because it's going to be a draw.
It struck me, apparently, that Snoop was a commentator. Snoop Dogg was a commentator, and I've heard some clips and it sounded hilarious. But also, I wanted to draw attention to the weigh-in. They both just look so sad. They both look so sad. And I was like, this is sad. Like, it made me feel sad. I was like, I'm not watching that. But yeah, hopefully we get Snoop over here on Sky or something like that. It'd be funny.
Yeah, I've only seen the clip of Snoop with the YouTuber thought, I don't know, one of the Paul brothers thought some basketball player or something.
Stop pretending you don't know, Joe.
No, because I don't follow American sports, so I don't know the American, and I don't follow the YouTube scene either, so I am totally out of my depth here. But it looked like a good old knockout on the highlight reel. Snoop says, he'll be okay. He's from the hood, which is great. Better than John Rawlin. And I'm a big fan of John Rawlin, but maybe BT should look into Snoop because,
maybe we get Snoop on the show. Yeah.
But what was my point with this? And then I was wondering, this could be interesting for we can try and hopefully get some answers in if anyone does watch this podcast. And what would be our British equivalent? YouTube celebrity versus former athlete, non-boxer. I thought it'd be brilliant. I was racking my brain. I say racking my brain. I gave it about 45 seconds thought, and I thought, is it like Ryland versus Wayne Bridge or something?
I'd watch
better, Wayne Bridge came to me straight away. I'm not sure why, but
he did a thingy, didn't he? He did a charity fight, and he was really quite good.
That's it. Then it's in the back of my mind, and I don't know what the YouTuber equivalent is. Like, if we've got big British YouTubers, apart from the ones that are probably already fighting. So I just went with generic celebrity. Ryland. I think he can have a fight.
He can move.
I reckon he hits like Tommy Hearns. He don't look like he can, but he can.
Well, let's put it out there. Yes.
The odds on it.
Yeah.
That was it. It was a proper knockout. Actually, we laugh, but it should never have. Nate Robinson, the basketball player, was down twice beforehand. Should never have been allowed to continue after the second one. Right. And then, it was a really bad.
When you get non-boxing, though, that's what happens, isn't it? People get hurt.
Yeah, 100%. It was basically what the fear was when Logan Paul fought KSI last year, and Eddie Hearn sort of got away with it because it was just so bad that they barely laid a glove on each other. But this time, actually, Jake Paul had at least had a fight before. And Nate Robinson was relying on the fact that he was an athlete, but he was worse than hopeless. So, yeah, it's the fact that no one's probably seen it, so maybe it won't get so much criticism.
I think that was on the back of his shorts, wasn't it? Worse than hopeless. Yeah.
Oh dear! But worryingly, Mike Tyson straight away was like, I want to fight every other month. Next stop, south of France. He wants to do something there.
Why not?
Why not? Well, I just hope it doesn't. Well, basically, the point is, if it happens, we don't have to talk about it anymore. We've done it, one and done.
Keep back in the draw, mate. Keep back in the draw.
So that is all for part one. In part two, we'll look ahead to, plenty of fights in the coming week on both Friday and Saturday nights. So after the heavyweights last weekend, we come down a couple of divisions. On Friday night, a few divisions, as Martin Murray challenges Billy Joe Saunders for his WBO super middleweight world title. Martin Murray in his 5th attempt to win a world title. I'll be honest, I know he was supposed to fight Billy Joe Saunders a couple of years ago, to be fair, but when that fell through, I didn't expect him to be fighting for a 5th world title. I remember when you fought him, George, you both said, and maybe this is just what boxers say, if I don't win this, that's it. But that was 4 years ago. Obviously, you won and went on. He lost and still went on. I'm very surprised he's still fighting. Are you surprised that he's? I mean, listen, fair play, he's got a 5th shot, but are you surprised?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't followed Martin Murray's career recently because he boxed Endam in Monte Carlo or somewhere after maybe 2 years after he fought me, and he lost, and I think he was shocked. He didn't think that was going to happen. Endam, he blows hot and cold, and he probably improved, and he was on a bit of a run at the time. And I can't remember if he retired or if it was that thing where people just assumed he retired and he had to come out and say no. But I thought he had retired. But then since he's had a couple of fights since, and he's now fighting for a world title against Billy Joe Saunders, which, in this time, in this period of, COVID sanctions and, no crowds and, there's no money and it's hard to bring people in and fights are putting together last minute, then you kind of would get away with this. But because it's Billy Joe Saunders and because he's never ever boxed anyone really, and you're looking through his box rec, he's only had 1 or 2 fights a year since 2013. There's no huge names on his record, even though he's a 2-weight world champion. And he won the belt against Andy Lee. He beat him on a majority decision. Andy Lee, a great former fighter, and for me, the biggest name on his record. But that was it feels like a long time ago now. I haven't got what's the name of the chap who he beat for the 2 middleweight world title, which was a vacant world title, which was kind of like it was WBO. Obviously, he's WBO world champion. Warren, who's with at the time, has got a fantastic relationship with WBO. Kind of slipped that in, got that done, and I assumed so that he could keep Saunders on side, but Saunders left him for the big fights. That's what he was told he was going to do. He was going to leave for the big fights, and since then, he hasn't had any big fights. And now he's fighting Martin Murray, who fighting for his 5th world title attempt, 38 years old. What you got the odds, Martin? I think you got it down as 1 to 25 on Saunders for this fight. So it's like, again, what we're going to learn about Billy Joe Saunders, is he going to be that guy who people think are really good, but we're never actually ever going to know? I think that could be the case. I wrote down some other names, like not just WBO ranked fighters, but Ron Richardson, who's British and Commonwealth champion. Zach Parker, we mentioned earlier off camera, like 19-0 now. He's in a final eliminator for the WBO. Why was that fight?
He's on the bill, isn't he? He's on the undercard.
Yeah. Oh, on the undercard. Like, yeah. I know Mark Murray's a bigger name, but is it because he's an easier fight? It's going to be a hard sell, I think. But for me, it's like there's question marks out there for me. Billy Joe Saunders, he's priced himself out, or he's pulled out of bigger fights before in the past, time again. Is he more content with the illusion that he's better than these guys than actually going there and fighting and proving it? Not actually getting the accolades or the money or the belts or anything else. Is he more than happy and content? He's a 2-weight world champion, phenomenal thing to have on your CV. But just waiting for big fights, But Smith's now fighting Canelo. A couple of weeks after. It's like the comparisons are, they're not even close. So.
In defence of Saunders, though, and his record, because I agree with you, and it has been disappointing, because I'm one of those people. I think he's a really talented fighter, and there's been a couple of moments where it hasn't gone his way. Like the Golovkin, he signed for Golovkin to box him at some expo in Astana. He's ready to go to Kazakhstan to box Golovkin. Signed for that, didn't happen. Demetrius Andrade fight, signed, ready to go to Boston to fight him. Got got stripped or vacated the belt because of an adverse finding of some drug test for a nasal spray. But, whatever. If it had happened over here, the fight would have gone ahead. So, okay, maybe shouldn't have taken it, but it was a bit of a strange one, that. And then he signed to fight Canelo before the pandemic kicked in. So he's had 3 big ones there where if you chuck any of them, or all 3 of them especially, his record looks great. But I'm with you on that, because the problem we've had is he doesn't box very regularly. And then when he does box, it's not even like they're interesting fights. It's always one of them where he gets through this one, then he's gonna do it. Or he's looked like in terrible shape or whatever because he hasn't really put any effort in, because he knows he's going to cruise through the fight. But when he gets a big fight, it will look really great because then he'll really try. It's the same with the Eubank fight. He didn't even train for that. So it's interesting it's like, who's to know what Billy Joe Saunders is going to turn up? Like, if he feels like everyone else and he's like, just got to turn up to beat Martin Murray these days, maybe he'll come unstuck. I can't see it myself, but Martin Murray, you've got to think he's going to be training like an absolute demon because he's got some mad chance out of nowhere. So maybe he'll be the best he's ever been, and he'd had a little break and stuff. He hasn't boxed for a year, just like everyone else. Who knows? And if Saunders turned up like he did against Artur Akavov that time, maybe get beat, and then it all falls down. But you're right. It's funny you mentioned that parallel with Callum Smith boxing in a couple of weeks, and the biggest star in the sport in a massive fight, the one they all wanted, and he's boxing Martin Murray on a Friday night. It's just strange how the two, paths can converge real quick.
As George mentioned, Saunders is 25-1 on Martin Murray, 10-1 with Betfair, the draw 33-1. It does feel like that, even if Martin Murray is somehow better than he's ever been, and that feels unlikely, that Saunders would still have to be either have taken his eye off the ball or just not be up for it to be a competitive fight.
But he does do that. He does do that, Mime. Like, time and time again, he's been hard to watch, And again, then it comes down to people saying, like, hypotheticals, like what he's actually capable of, or like, what they've seen in the gym. But sometimes he's really tough to watch, And you can tell it's obvious where he's either not trained properly, not prepared properly, not focused properly, he hasn't dieted, he's poor choices outside the ring, crashed the weight. All these things, I'm sure, are factors in his in his performances. But sometimes he's really struggled. And if he was going to go into a fight now with, say, a rematch with John Ryder or Chris Eubank Jr., I think he gets beat. And that's like, and everyone will go, they'll be shocked to hear that. But because of their lifestyles, I think John Ryder, who I thought was very unlucky against Callum Smith, he showed that as an improved fighter, and when he switched on, I think he would give Saunders nightmares. And same with Chris Eubank Jr. I think he sometimes makes the wrong decisions outside of boxing, but that's not like health and health choices. It's more just he's decided to go a bizarre route in terms of the boxing path that he's taken and the opponents that he's chosen. But I think Saunders and Eubank is a terrific fight. I mean, I don't know why that hasn't been demanded and why it hasn't happened. It's a rematch that everyone want to see. And if I was Eubank, I'd be confident in that fight of getting a win. But, who knows?
And of course, Saunders has sort of hopped around trainers recently. Now with Mark Tibbs, having been with Ben Davison and Dominic Ingle for a bit. I guess there are questions, but in terms of Martin Murray, George, he always had that high guard style. Was it quite easy to put together a game plan to fight him?
He's technically a good, accomplished professional. I think I had a lot of natural size as an advantage, and then the styles between us that was only going to enable me. He has high hands, but but with good lateral head movement and changes the head height position, and then he'll dip inside. He'll throw shots downstairs, upstairs. A well-rounded pro. Saunders, southpaw with very fast hands. Don't think he's got particularly a big punch, but does have a huge array of shots that he can, come at you with. Technically, very well drilled as well. Great lateral head movement. He cuts inside and outside of the line and punches off of it. But 9 times out of 10, we've seen him before when he hasn't prepared properly and he can't sustain that pace or sustain that concentration for a full 12 rounds. I think if Murray comes in and lingers in range, then he might come unstuck. If he keeps it at slightly more of a distance, but with a good work rate, he'll stand much better chance of winning and having an effect on Saunders. You kind of don't want him to go. Saunders, he was a prolific amateur. He won everything as even a junior, a tiny schoolboy. He won, all the schoolboy titles, junior ABAs, everything. And then he went straight onto squad for the 2008 team. He almost jumped the queue. The guy in front of him was a fella called Neil Perkins, who either had an injury or might have even just had a bad run. Saunders jumped him, won a bunch of bouts, qualified for the Olympics, and went one of the youngest in the team that year. Done that with phenomenal hand speed, which you needed in amateur boxing back then when it was point scoring, but also fantastic defensive skills, which were just what you'd imagine he's learned in his amateur gym. I think it was Cheshunt, or it was another gym before then, where they're doing pad work where it's a 3-punch combination and then they cut off with the head and then they come back again. And where he was so quick, he used to have so much success, and that's still ingrained in him now as a professional, years and years and years later. But over 12 3-minute rounds with tiny gloves, and if you haven't got the focus or the concentration or the fitness to sustain that high intensity level of activity, it'll have an effect, and that might be what Martin Murray would be thinking in his sort of preparations for the fight, that I want to keep this guy working or keep him thinking, get his brain exhausted in the first half of the fight, and then I'll physically impose myself in the second half of the fight. But at 38 years of age, when he hasn't really done that for years and years and years now, and the couple of hard fights and big fights that he's been in the last 5-6 years, he's lost. Might be too much to ask for, but if Saunders shows up out of shape last minute, hasn't taken it seriously, and Murray is in shape, this could be a great fight. This could be a really good one to watch. So I'm kind of hoping for that. It'd be a fantastic fight to watch.
It would certainly be a great story if somehow Martin Murray can't pull it off. I don't think anyone's had a bad word to say about him. And he was unlucky in his first couple of world title fights. Less so obviously against Golovkin and then against Arthur Abraham. But it would be a great story. It would be another sort of COVID boost, if you like. I know you don't think that exists, George. No, of course not. No, but in terms of opportunities arising through adversity, there we go. It would be a nice little tale. 24 hours later, the same venue actually as Dubois Joyce, Anthony Yarde takes on Lyndon Arthur for the British light heavyweight title. Second all British. No, of course it's all British. Never mind. Ignore me. But anyway, the second all British main event. That is a good fight to make. Let's put it that way, Declan. In terms of, I know Anthony Yarde suffered a defeat, but it was to Sergei Kovalev. It's a good fight at this point for both men.
I think it's a great fight, and this one, especially, these were supposed to be on. No, they weren't supposed to be on the same card. This was supposed to be Tyson Fury, so this was supposed to be main event for a Tyson Fury run out or co-main event rather. So to get it a week after Dubois Joyce, I mean, it just shows how great we've had it actually in COVID times as boxing fans, because it's a really good fight, really solid fight. I said a few months ago after Yarde beat Dex Spellman that I think Lyndon Arthur could cause him a few problems. I don't necessarily see him winning, but it all depends on what sort of Anthony Yarde we get. I mean, he stopped Dex Spellman. He looked like he was on another level to him. Lyndon Arthur beat him on points, and as much as I hate to, compare common opponents like that, there is quite a recent one. And based on that, you would think, obviously, Anthony Yarde's the favourite. I'm sure you'll tell us the odds. He's the favourite, but it's a real good, solid fight. Lyndon Arthur has been sort of plugging away and has almost been like the second man to Yarde, who's been a bit like Daniel Dubois in Frank Warren's stable, pushed as a leading light for a long time, much due to the lack of anyone else really, but it's meant that he's been almost ahead of time. He's been pushed as the star. He went to Russia, didn't go his way, almost did, but then he came unstuck, and he's rebuilt. I'm surprised to be honest, I'm a bit surprised we got it. I'm a bit surprised he's taken it, because they could have wheeled out anyone for him for this sort of fight. So good on him for taking it. I think that says a lot. He's had an awful COVID, really sad, lost members of his family to the virus. But he's back now. He beat Dex Spellman, and it's a real serious fight. And I think if he wins this in style, it shows us that he's, that even after what happened against Kovalev, a faded Kovalev as well, that he is ready for that world level. And that it will only lead to world title fights, I'm sure, if he does a job on Lyndon Arthur. But yeah, great fight.
Yeah, it is indeed favourite, 8-1 on with Betfair. Arthur 9-2, the draw 25-1. George, are there similarities in how he and Dubois were sort of brought on? As Dave mentioned, Yarde was, he ran Kovalev reasonably close, but this is a sort of, to keep using that phrase, middle fight. Is that exactly what this could well be?
Yeah, I think with Yarde, he was moving along pretty well and the best he possibly could, like being in the setup, boxing on BT. So they were doing a good job of him, and it seemed like this opportunity had come up to fight Kovalev for a world title. They fancied it and they went for it. So it wasn't like they've picked a testing fight for him and it was just a bit too much. This is like that opportunity where you go, right, can you beat this guy? You become world champion. Can you stay a world champion? Because who's next? And sometimes the guy in front of you who's the champion, you've just got his number, but you're not actually ready for that level. But I thought Yarde was, and I thought he did very well against Kovalev. And this fight now is really interesting with against Arthur, because in some ways Arthur does a lot of things right that you need to beat someone like Yarde. Yarde's got that sort of low front hand. He rolls with the shoulder. He looks to fire off of it. Huge upper body. Looks to it's all power and very explosive. And the way you break that guy down is you have to jab him first. And in the last fight I saw Arthur versus Speckman, he was his jab was good. Like that was what controlled the fight, and he was able to punch off of it. And that's what he'll definitely need, in my opinion, against Yarde. Is you don't want a target that's there 1 second and then turned away from you the next. And a jab is the thing that will get this guy to stand still. But what might, trying to think of a better terminology for it, because I hate this terminology, but like the levels, Dex said earlier that Arthur went the distance with Speckman, and Yarde stopped him. What was the difference there? Sometimes it might, it's Yarde's first fight after fighting for a world title. Was he, just shaking out, and then as soon as he put it together, boom, put the guy away? And was that the level? Was it that showing that he's a level above? And will that be the same, next weekend? So will it be that it doesn't really matter who momentum in the fight, because as soon as Yarde is that level above, as soon as he switches on, he's going to land a big power shot. He's going to put the combinations together well. He's going to, see out the show. So interesting, really, really interesting. I think we'll learn a little bit about Yarde, but we'll learn a lot more about Arthur, who seems to be a really good fighter.
I think I agree with the jab. His jab is clearly really, really good, like world-class jab. And I knew that you would appreciate that as a jabber yourself, George. But I think also that Collyhurst and Mostyn club where he came through, they're all really good jabbers. But if they can take away his jab, then he's in real trouble. Like if they can come up with a game plan where he can't get the jab off and he can't land a double jab, he can't pin Yarde down. If they can do that, it could be an easy night for him. But if they can't, and he's getting caught with that jab and Yarde can't settle, then I think it could be really interesting. But it's going to be as simple as that, for as far as I can see. Really looking forward to it. And yeah, a great one. It's a shame, again, another shame there's no crowd there. But
you break it down from a technical point of view, when you've got someone like Yarde, like, it's tough because you need your jab to be long, fast, sharp, and effective. The double jab might not work with him because he's gone by the second time. Sometimes even the first one just not there. It's always going to be touch and glance off the top of his head, and you're not actually able to stand the guy still in front of you. Because imagine you've got a usual standard guy who might square up against you. You knock him with the jab and you push him upright. Whereas here, you're actually pushing him back down more into his defensive style, which for him isn't just defensive. It's an explosive style that he looks to fire off of. So it'd be real interesting. How does he vary that? It's going to have to be head and body. Sometimes the body might not be there. He might have turned away, well enough that he can't land anything significant to the body. Has he got to start changing the angles on the jab? Has he then got to start making an angle with the lead hand, but then also change his foot position straight away after? Could be real interesting technical fight, and it could be someone. How does someone break down Anthony Yarde, break down this style? It's got to be someone with a very good jab, but not just the jab. It's going to have to be what comes off of the jab. What does the jab manifest itself into? So it might be very, very interesting.
One to look out for next weekend. Actually, it's the Frank Warren's 40th anniversary week this week. Fond memories, George, of your time together?
Yeah, so I first time I boxed on a Frank show, I was the outsider. Obviously, that was against James DeGale. He was suitably impressed, and then he made me a great offer, and we signed up together, which I hope would have been longer than it was. But I boxed Paul Smith on the first fight. I went out and boxed on a Golden Boy show in between. Came back, fought Glenn Johnson, which at the time for me didn't really feel like much. But like now, lots of people really enjoyed that fight. So I'll thank Frank for that.
I've got a funny story about that Glenn Johnson one. I remember I got a tip the morning of the presser from someone who's usually really solid and has been since, saying that you were the press conference was to announce you against Kelly Pavlik.
All right.
Just totally wrong. It was like, oh no, it's Glenkoff Johnson. It was like, oh, okay.
Oh, how disappointing was that? I mean, I was pushing for Pavlik then. I was pushing for everyone. I think I was times I was trying to get Jeff Lacey. Glenn Johnson. I think it was only a year or so after he'd pushed throttled away in the World Series. He'd come in last minute and roll back the years. I was like, all right, let's have him. Yeah, I tried to finish him in the first round, and then thought I was going to gas out. Tried again in the fifth round, and then gassed out, and then thought, I'm not doing it. He's going to old man me. That was an expression I was worried about in camp. I'm going to get old manned, and thought, points will do. But yeah, Frank, happy anniversary to Frank Warren. Fantastic promoter. Still the last of the old school. He's up for a punt every now and again. And I like that. Don't see it that often.
Very good. No bad stories there then. Didn't manage to get in.
No. We parted ways amicably. I Nothing on the horizon. It's just that he was. I was trying to move on with a fight that we couldn't get done, and I ended up in 2 fights. One on a Sauerland bill, one on a Matchroom card. Then boxed on Froch Kessler undercard chief support, and then promoter 3 went into that my first world title fight. So me and Frank are still friends. I mean, he's more likely to answer the phone if I call him than most of the other promoters, but still not guaranteed. Who knows? But we're friends. I didn't know his anniversary. We're not that good of friends, but I'll send him a card. I'll sign your names as well. And we'll be all right.
That'll make all the difference. So, a few hours after Anthony Yarde against Lyndon Arthur, Errol Spence makes his return to the ring against Danny Garcia. Of course, not long after Terence Crawford's win over Kell Brook. A lot of this fight, and I'm sure the build-up will continue to be dominated by it, is really how Errol Spence recovered and has recovered from his car accident, which, if you look at the pictures, it was obviously very serious. But you have to assume that he is physically as good as he can be. It's been quite a while. As in, don't look at me like that. What's that, sorry?
You have to assume that he's physically as good as he was?
No. So I mean, he has. You have to assume he's as physically good, as physically well as he can be in terms of he's not going to get any better. So he's recovered as well as he can do from that crash.
Yeah.
So it's now, there's no point waiting any longer. Is what I mean. But it is an unanswered question, both physically and mentally. You could argue.
You could even argue that. Obviously, we don't know, but he's cheated death. Like that, the video of that car accident is unbelievable, and that he came out of that with what we were told is just facial lacerations, and we've seen the pictures. Like so bad. Like he's so lucky, and he will know that. And sometimes with anyone that sort of thing happens to, it changes their outlook on life. Never mind being a boxer. So maybe he'll get better, but at the same time, who's to know what that's done to his brain or what's that done to his body or whatever, or to his mentality or anything going into a fight like that. And it's not just at any fight. He's fighting Danny Garcia, who is one of the best welterweights in the world without a shadow of a doubt. And I think people are sleeping on Garcia a lot. For me, Garcia is, he's a future Hall of Famer. I mean, if he beats Errol Spence, certainly, but his career has been unbelievable. I can't wait for it. I'm really looking forward to it, because if there's anything not right about Errol Spence, he don't want to be in there against Danny Garcia at any point, and they're going to trade at some point. But then at the same time, Errol Spence, really good southpaw, strong, solid at his best. I'd pick him to beat Danny Garcia. So if he's back and it no ill effects whatsoever, he's going to win the fight. But I'm sure you've got some odds there. But as far as I can tell, the Garcia stoppage is unbelievably wide, just for value. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if you're a value man, then I just feel like people are overlooking him massively.
Garcia is 17-2 to stop Errol Spence. He's 3-1 just to win. Errol Spence 9-2 on. Another victory for your Premier Sports as well. Part of that first month.
Go on the Premier Sports. Yeah, the month's still going before I have to phone up and cancel it.
But you can do it online. It's really easy.
Can't cancel it now. No, that's that's subscription's the way forward, isn't it? Beats the old just pay to watch, pay-per-view. You get a free fight out of it. I'm with Deck a little bit here. Garcia's a very good fighter, very good, effective fighter. And I'm tempted by them odds, even if it is the best Spence, on paper, should beat Garcia, but Garcia's, he
can really punch.
The hook, it's one of the best hooks in the business right now. He just throws it so loose and fast, and it will come out of nowhere, and it can change a fight and turn it on his head like that. I'm going to go Garcia. I think Garcia wins.
We know a left hook is a good one. It's a bit of a southpaw kryptonite at times. I don't think Errol Spence is particularly open to it necessarily. But when you've got someone who can throw a left hook like that from out of nowhere, even when they're in trouble, even when they're down on the cards, I just think the value is ridiculous on that. And also, who's to know what Errol Spence is going to be like after this long out and after what happened to him? Really good fight. Another one of the PBC fights that they just cough up these welterweight classics, and I think this could be one.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, there's no value in Spence. Of course, the value is in Garcia, but we will find out next week whether Dick and Joe. We should really start keeping a running tally of these, actually.
Yeah, we should.
But you've done well recently. We'll find out next week if indeed they were right, if Garcia is able to upset Spence. And we'll, of course, look back at Martin Murray's challenge against Billy Joe Saunders and at Anthony Yarde against Lyndon Arthur. And then, of course, we'll look ahead to the following week when Anthony Joshua makes his return against Kubrat Pulev. And hopefully for British fight fans anyway, take another step closer to a unification with Tyson Fury. Thank you for tuning in. As I said, please do give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, please rate and review if you're listening. Thank you, Declan. Thank you, George. Thank you all, and see you next week.